Okay, we only have 37 minutes, but that should be enough to talk about what we want to talk about. So, I know it's been a minute since I've uploaded, but I feel like now's the appropriate time since I've found myself down another rabbit hole. And what that was is I've been like watching tons of videos like about the Waco, Texas shooting, which is basically if you're unaware, I'm not gonna give a good description of what it is here. I'm just gonna argue my case for it, and what I think about it, and why. I'll get into it, but basically, okay. So David Koresh, and his cult, the Branch Davidians, are on Mount Carmel, and they get raided by the ATF. So that's it. And it includes like I believe it was 51 day standoff with the ATF. So let's go ahead and start my argument. Okay, before I say any of this, could I just clarify that David Koresh and the Branch Davidians were horrible? I feel like that should be obvious, but I'm gonna trash talk the ATF a lot in the next 30 minutes or so. So I feel like it's necessary to clarify. David Koresh was a child molester and married a 14-year-old girl with her father's permission. So it was still legal under Texas law, but that does not make it any better. That's still disgusting. I do not care what the law says. He possibly molested more children. And this one isn't necessarily like illegal, but it's still nasty. He fornicated with the former cult leader's mother. Yeah. And there's a lot more that I don't have time to talk about today. But here's the spill. Okay. The Waco, Texas shooting and Waco, Texas incident, whatever you want to call it, is a massacre. And it scares me. But not because of the cult. It scares me because what the ATF was willing to get away with. So, okay. Let me explain a little bit. So, the ATF logically had no reason to raid the Mount Carmel and the Waco and the Branch Davidian complex. They had no reason to. What they wanted to do was, you gotta understand this before you understand anything. At the time, their image was not great. They had just got off of Ruby Ridge, which, okay, let me explain it now. So there's this dude, right? Names don't matter since this is just my redneck storytelling time. But he has sawed-off shotgun. Shotguns and most guns are supposed to have a certain barrel length. He sewed it beneath that, and he missed his court date since he lived off the grid and wasn't very keen on checking his mailbox. So what happens is, dead of night, ATF police officer walks over there, right, middle of the night, creeping through there. Dog starts barking at him. He shoots the dog. Dog has not even bit him yet. It's just standing there barking. So the son comes out to check on the dog. Keep in mind, these people are off the grid. They're pretty redneck. So that's saying something. I'm wearing a NASCAR T-shirt and talking about a Texas cult. It's coming from me, so you know they were redneck. So it's late at night. All the sun sees is there is a strange man who just shot my dog. So obviously he shoots back. Well, officer shoots back at him and he kills the son. So this leads to the standoff starting after the dad goes out, and keep in mind the officer was wounded, but so he goes back and the ATF comes and they like full spawn. It spawns the standoff. The dad puts his son in the shed because he knows he's not gonna be able to bury him before the ATF comes. Yada yada yada. Keep in mind, he had no idea what was happening. He had to wait until the not the FDA, the ATF got there and started screaming demands to even know what he was in for. But basically what happens is after so many days, the wife and the husband come out and they have other children inside. So the father says, okay, I'll give you up if you let me bury my son. Right? Now, this next part, and this could be a little wishy-washy, because it is my memory is horrible, and there is 50 different tellings of what happens next. But basically what happens is Sniper is told to take the shot, and he misses. And he shoots the wife instead, while she has her dead son's corpse in her hands, which is morbid. And again, the father is arrested. This is horrible because a mother and her son are dead solely because a shotgun was sawed off below what it should have been. So this was highly publicized, and the ATF did not look very good at all. So that was at Ruby Ridge. I don't know if I said it was Ruby Ridge, but Ruby Ridge. And so the ATF does not have a very good image right now. They are seen as public enemy number one. So it's very obvious they were going to use this as a way to get back into the limelight with the public. So you may be asking yourself, well, ATF stands for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, I think. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. So, you may be asking yourself, well, they had to have some sort of evidence. What was their evidence to start the raid? So here's what happens, alright? The Branch Davidians, one of their members had a gun store, and okay, to have a gun store, you have to have an FFL, which is just a firearms license. It makes it where you can legally, over the table, sell and buy firearms, make them, manufacture them. It's not that big of a deal. It's something that you, as a citizen, can get. If you're over the age of 18 and you can legally buy a gun, obviously, but it just basically says you can legally make and sell guns, or buy them, or trade. It's whatever. So the Branch Davidians did this a lot. They followed all the requirements that were met by the government. They did make guns, but they would make the guns, shoot them, sell them, because that was just what they did for fun. Commonly, what they would do to bring in revenue from the Branch Davidians is the dude who owned the gun store would take the guns out to gun shows and sell them all, and all the funds would go directly back to the Branch Davidians. But dummy grenades are popular at gun shows. Yeah, no, really, because they're fake grenades. But apparently one dude carrying a package dropped it, and it opened, and he saw a dummy grenade with gunpowder, which again is not out of the ordinary. That just happens, and they claimed that this was enough to support a raid. But hold up, but wait, there was more. They also found several gun barrels, like revolver, like barrels, and they thought, that means that isn't they could do violent acts with this, and they could participate in violent acts with this, and they use that as enough, which is basically me, which is basically. Okay, I want to use a different analogy since this was that analogy I saw in the Wendigoon video. But basically, in the Wendigoon video about it, which was the first one I watched, along with the others, he said it's basically someone walking into a kitchen and seeing a steak knife and immediately assuming you're going to stab them with it. It doesn't make any sense. But, they also included a false report where a couple months prior, there had been a noise complaint, and a neighbor of the Mount Carmel complex had said that he thought he heard full auto fire, right? Which is a no-no. If you don't have the right licenses, that is a heavy no-no. But so what left out was that the sheriff of the town was sent over there and checked it out, and it was just someone pulling the trigger fast. Since, okay, if you don't know your guns, semi-auto is as fast as you can pull the trigger, and full auto is hold down and it's and it will like self-fire. So if you can pull your trigger fast enough, it can go at the same pace as full auto, but that's really hard. And I just realized how wrong this looks. I'm immature, but they left out the second part so they could make it look like they, in their report thingy, in their warrant, that they had a right reason. Also, they included a lot of stuff that they had zero jurisdiction over. Like, they included reports of child abuse and child molestation, and even though CPS had already done a look-in to them a couple months ago and found nothing, they still felt like it was necessary to include that, which, again, they don't even have jurisdiction over that. So that's already out of... Either way, they got the warrant, and they started the siege. And that, on its own, should be terrifying enough, right? They were able to collect a group of false evidence, and it was enough for them to get the warrant to go and raid a complex that was filled with women and children. Right. So, let's cut... Okay, before I continue and we talk about the actual raid itself... David Koresh had to be stopped. That's obvious, right? But this was not the way to do it. There was a lot of other stuff that could have got him on, but this was... If they would have waited long enough, they could have got him on something, but no. The ATF had to have their little hungry pity party to get back into the public limelight, so we, of course, we had to go kill men, women, and children. So basically what happened day of the raid is a news reporter finds out from a buddy in the ATF, hey, there's a raid going down at Mount Carmel. So this dude asks this news reporter, who's like chomping at the bit for something, because this is a media frenzy. He goes in, he stops at this post office. This male guy, I forget the name, post office worker, whatever, male guy on the side of the road. He says, hey, do you know how to get to Mount Carmel? And he gives him directions. Little did he know that that dude was David Koреш's brother-in-law, and he immediately ran full speed back down to the complex and told everyone, "Hey, there's about to be an ATF raid. They're gonna kill men, women, and children. So you might wanna, tuck and roll." So they got everyone inside, and the men grabbed guns, and long story short, it's not really sure who fired first on the first day of the raid. In all actuality, it was probably the ATF, but I mean, somebody was going to shoot first. I feel like that's kind of obvious. But, like, my question is, like, okay, if you get raided by the ATF and you, like, and they, like, it's shoot on sight, right? He claimed that he could shoot back, and that it was self-defense. David Koresh did. And that confused me, because it's like, no, you really can't. But at the same time, like, that's a good point. Because, like, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here. But the base idea of that is, he believed that this was an act of corruption by the government, and that they had no right to do any of this. So, that was fun. But, yeah. He said, "Oh, we can shoot back," and the ATF made a couple deals with him. We'll go over it through over here. He said he'll set the people free if they'll all come out with their hands up if they give him a camera and let him record what's going on inside there for a little bit, and they send it to news outlets. Which obviously the ATF was like, no, because this whole thing was a stunt for the ATF to get more public support, since, again, Ruby Ridge. But in a sense, they told him, yeah, sure, but they really didn't. So, old Davey boy, he did that. He took the video, he sent it back to him, and you can find logs of it online now, since it's only 4 minutes long. But they did not send it out to news outlets. Which, again, why would they? And he did not follow through, even though, again, he didn't know that they hadn't sent it out to news outlets. He said that God told him he did not need to come out yet. So that's the thing. Then there was the thing, he straight up said, anybody who wants to leave can leave. I'm not keeping them there. Which, this is kind of in line with what the Branch Davidians were. Because they had a very strict open door policy where who could just go and come as they please. If you wanted to come in and listen to a sermon, you could. Which is, again, how the ATF got in there and how they found the revolver barrel. Which they said, again, oh, that's no, but yeah. Yeah, then as the siege went on for longer, they started using psychological warfare, which is just gross. Like, it's disgusting that they would stoop so low. So basically what they did was they played loud and horrifying noises, such as rabbits being murdered, and dolphin noises, and loud, like, sirens, to get them to come out, and they were, like, flashing lights, and stuff. Like, you can find videos of it from old news clips on YouTube. It's immature, because they're supposed to be like this beacon of hope and law and order, but they're, again, if stooping apparently supposedly down to their level, which, is fun. So they start pulling out. Okay, I forgot to mention, after the first day, there was a ceasefire to let them bury their dead, because a lot of people died the first day. So they buried their dead, and at this point, during the day, they would have tanks just come over and roll over where they buried the bodies, like back and forth, just to taunt them, which is disgusting, to say the least. But at that point, they were like, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah, ATF. So basically, this all culminated in a point where the ATF was getting sick and tired, and the operators and the negotiators were being rushed. So what happened is somehow the phone line gets destroyed because they only had one phone line because they had cut the rest because they did not want David Koresh talking to the media. But what happened was somehow the phones get destroyed, and they take this as the go ahead. The ATF does to go in, and they already had a tank outside, so it's not very, so they took this as the go ahead, so they're already going. But then the Branch Davidians, they throw out the phone with a note that says, "We want our phones back." And by that time, it had already started, and within the next 45 minutes to an hour, they were all dead. There's not that much to it. They apparently the women and children were supposed to go down and do a bunker, but okay, part of it had been like crushed or something. I can't remember. But basically, yeah. But the baseline idea is basically the bunker that they had intended was sealed off, and there was no way for them to get in there since they were just going to use that since they had gas masks ready. But there was, again, they didn't fit the children and the kids, which there was a lot. Because apparently Branch Davidians don't know how to keep it in their pants. So that's fun. But, so, yeah, they had launched a lot of they had started, like, chemical warfare. They launched tear gas in, and they had the gas masks on the men, again, who were armed. And, again, they tried to get into the bunker with the children, but no. Also, just to mention, not everyone died. There was, like, 8 or 10, maybe 12 people who left. Children who left within the time span of the raid. There was only one time where they were like, "Hey, everybody wants to leave now. This is your shot," and most of it consisted of children. And there was a couple women, but they were immediately arrested and accused of statutory rape, and which was since again there was no evidence that everyone in there was a rapist. It was first just David Koresh, but then the story started to change. So again, there was no evidence to support that. They didn't even know who these women were. They just immediately went off and said no, statutory rape, and they took the children in for questioning and asked them vague questions so they could get vague answers and they could warp it into something for the media. So they could, make it pro ATF, because again, Ruby Ridge. Last day of the raid, the phone gets thrown out. At this point, it had already started. They threw in the tear gas. The tank was going in, and somehow, I'm putting air quotes there for reasons we'll get into in a minute, the house catches on fire, and what happens is, okay, there was a sniper positioned, which is funny because it's the same one from Ruby Ridge that killed the wife the one dude's wife while she had her son's body in her hands, which, is very pleasant. But same sniper for Ruby Ridge is there, and they're like, alright, it's already started. If you catch him in a window, pick him off, but they did not. And they find, David Koresh's, I forget his name. He did some, talking with the negotiators a little bit, but I forget his name. Basically, David Koresh's right-hand man, and he shot him and then shot himself as a mercy kill. Because he knew, like, when the tear gas was thrown and the tank pushed in, that it was over, and that, again, when the house caught on fire, that was it. So the house caught on fire, and in the preceding trials after this, they claimed that they did it themselves, and this was because they had microphones in the walls of the complex at this point when the raid had happened. They had like microphones in the walls, and they could hear. And there was some garbled audio from before the tank came in. They said something, light it up, and it was barely coherent audio. But they said, oh no, that's good enough to say they were lighting Molotovs or anything, right? They said they were going to light themselves on fire, which again, you can't even really make out what they're saying in there, so it could be anything. But what happened is they go in and, okay, years later, we got confirmation that there's this certain type of, like, projectile. It was like a grenade. And it's not supposed to be flammable. But it's flammable when it's touched with CS gas, which is, again, is what tear gas is. And they said, oh no, we were trying to hit the water supply behind them, because as tanks are running through the building itself, and there's CS gas everywhere, that makes sense. You're still gonna, like, try to shoot through an entire building to hit the water supply behind them. Because that makes sense, even though they're all going to be dead within the next hour. But, yeah. And the ATF shot, the projectile thingy. It doesn't really matter what it's called for this moment. It catches on fire, starts the fire, and the whole place burns to the ground. And it's kind of morbid, because immediately after this wasn't seen as the tragedy it more than likely is. The ATF agents were the majority. There were some that were remorseful, but not very many. They immediately started, like, dancing around and mocking him while there were corpses of children, like, within 20 feet of them. So they were dancing on the corpses of children, which is very fun, very nice. And this was just seen as not a tragedy, but a good thing. Like, oh, the good guys got the bad guys. Which, again, this isn't very black and white, because obviously the Branch Davidians were awful. David Koresh was molesting children and was taking advantage of people, and it was getting very bad. But, again, mainly because he believed he was the new Messiah, which, again, is not very good. But what, so, like, obviously, something had to be done, but at the same time, the ATF had no right, and that was, again, a gun barrel and a dummy grenade and some gunpowder was all they needed, and that is scary, because they had proper licensing to have all of that. They had an FFL, they were legally making guns, and that was fine. It was all very over the table. The local gun shops, when they were asked about them, they were, like, very chill with them. They said they traded guns all the time. They would sell back and forth. I mean, they knew them very well. But apparently that was not enough. And keep in mind, David Chris knew about the ATF even when they had their mole in there. There was conversations that were recorded of them where it was very obvious that he said he knew who they were, but he did nothing about it because there was no point. But he extended an invitation to the ATF to come in and look themselves months prior to the raid. He knew about it. He knew that the ATF was questioning them, and the local sheriff's department was getting questioned about him. So he said, "Hey, you're welcome to come in and go through all our guns and all our records and all our papers, anything, right now." But the ATF denied this for some reason, and it led to the deaths of so many women and children. So that's fun. You know, nothing so trivial that the government can't kill you for it. So yeah, there wasn't much that happened after this. A majority of the people were dead, so there was nothing really left. There was no story to tell. Everyone that was there was already dead. I didn't really do the whole thing justice. There's a video by Wendigoon. It's an hour and a half long that I watched. It's the first video I watched on this. That one goes into a lot more detail on the actual events leading up to it than I did here. I didn't really go into anything before it. I just talked about Mount Carmel and the raid itself. But yeah, watch that if you want the whole thing. But until then, this is it. Yeah.